The final speaker in this morning's session is Kim Long, who is a self-employed facilitator and community worker from Glasgow, living in the East End. She has a background in youth work and a first-class degree, well done, in European Studies and English. And on behalf of a number of key third sector organisations, Kim works with economically and socially marginalised women and young people. She helped build a new social enterprise developing creative work in criminal justice, and through this she leads groundbreaking singing and songwriting projects in prisons across Scotland. She's an active member of Women for Independence and is a Green Party activist and Westminster candidate for Glasgow East. So thank you for taking time away from the doorstep today.
Thank you. It's really great to be here, and I'm sorry I can't be around all day. I need to go and speak at a political thing, but I would really like to hear what the conclusions are, so I would love to check back in with that. Also, I'm not speaking on behalf of any of the organisations that I work for or the Scottish Green Party. This is my story. So, I am a Christian feminist, and I would say that spiritually I am homeless at the moment. Christianity and feminism are deeply interlinked in my identity. I first realised I was a feminist because of obnoxious Christians. I realised that feminist values are entirely aligned with Jesus' message of justice and inclusion and equality, so there is no discord whatsoever between my feminism and my faith. But I have encountered significant challenges in living authentically as a feminist Christian within the church. I think that these challenges are true for any progressive Christian, but I think feminism is greeted in certain areas of the church by a particularly potent rage. Also, we've talked about intersectionality, and I find it really difficult to reconcile my values with the church's hostility towards LGBT people, even though personally I'm straight. So I'll share a bit of my story. I do want to note that lots of people within the church are doing amazing things and giving sacrificially of their time and talents and money. And there are lots of good people who are conservative evangelical Christians. I've got a skewed perspective because I ended up being really involved in the kind of inner workings of the Church of Scotland, and because most of my encounters with conservative evangelicals have been quite bruising. So this is not the whole picture, this is just my story. And I have no answers, but a lot of questions. So I grew up in a Church of Scotland in Glasgow. Less than 10% of us in my year group were brought up going to church, and that was Catholic or Protestant. So we were very much a minority, and we felt that. It wasn't cool to admit that you went to church, and we didn't express our faith in any public way. We did have a wonderful youth worker who's now my dear friend, and we were encouraged to develop a broad worldview and learn about global justice issues. So I had a really positive experience of youth work, but my connection with the rest of the church was freeing. And by my mid-teens, I stopped going to church and would have left my faith altogether. But then I went to this amazing thing called the National Youth Assembly, which is for everyone in the Church of Scotland, any way connected, between 16 and 25. And for the first time, it was a place that I felt like, look at all these people who are just like me. And questions were allowed. You could talk about sex. Finally. And it was wonderful, and everyone was welcome, and you could think critically and engage with things, and I loved it. And so I had a lot of opportunities to grow as a leader, so I was a small group leader, and then I kind of progressed through that and ended up the moderator, which is like the chairperson. So suddenly I was in quite a kind of public profile within Churchland. And then I went to the General Assembly, which is where the Church of Scotland makes its decisions every year. And there was a debate about sex, and it was ridiculous. It just got completely out of hand. People were using the kind of slippery slope argument to an absurd degree. And I just stood up and said, look, this is what we've actually been asked to talk about, this proposal. This has nothing to do with what you're talking about now. Can we just go back to that, please? So I spoke well, and then I got put on a special commission. So the Church of Scotland has been wrestling for the past few years about the issue of L and G. We've not got to the B and the T ministers. So there was one particular issue that had come up, and so the Church of Scotland responded to that by saying, right, we'll have 9 people who will discuss this for 2 years and then come up with a policy suggestion for the church. And we had to survey the entire church and then kind of come up with that. And there were 9 of us, and it was awful. It was really overwhelming. The workload was insane, and everybody else on it, I mean, I was 19. I'd never been in a professional environment before. Everyone else was a professor, a reverend professor. And it was very difficult to be part of a group that had been deliberately selected to be the opposite ends of viewpoints. And particularly, we were all there representing something. So I was there as a woman and a young person. Someone else was there because they were a prominent young evangelical minister. You know, so everybody felt this responsibility to not speak for themselves, but to uphold everyone's views. And that is not something that you can do. So, yeah, that was really difficult. So even as a straight person, it was really hard to deal with this thing of people having really sincerely held views, but the church has this distinction between being gay, which the Church of Scotland says is fine, but you're not allowed to do anything about that. You just have to be celibate. And I feel that that's an artificial distinction, and it doesn't really exist in reality. So that was pretty hard. Like one church in a wealthy area wrote a response to our survey saying if we were to have gay people in our church. And I knew for a fact that there were gay people in that church, and yeah. At the same time as moderator of the Youth Assembly, I was working really hard in kind of other committees to try and get young people's voice cemented into that decision-making process, and we had really radical plans. And then there was a whole load of internal drama, and basically all the plans got lost completely. And there was a final straw, which was that a letter was sent round all churches saying that the National Youth Assembly, my beloved NYA, was not a safe place for our children, because the insinuation was that some of the leadership were lesbian and gay. And I was told that no response would be forthcoming to challenge this assertion. So I resigned, and really that was the end of me going to church. The Church of Scotland, it appears to me, is not an organisation that's interested in learning and changing. And there's only so much energy you have, and I'm not interested in banging my head against a brick wall anymore. At the same time, my then boyfriend, now husband, was working for an evangelical church, and that had its own challenges. He's a feminist, but he lived with the son of the minister in this church where he worked, and so if the son had friends round, I just hid in the bedroom, because if I was in my pyjamas and I was clearly staying over, that could cause problems for my husband at work, so we just had to hide that. And like someone wrote on his Facebook as a joke, not very funny, but someone said, that we were having a baby, and so he got summoned to a disciplinary meeting, and no one bothered to check if it was true first. And once you leave the Christian bubble, you realise how weird this is, and especially because people my age don't grow up with church as a default setting, so it's very alien. And so I feel like as an adult in a social or a work setting, it's almost like a coming out, and I say that lightly, but you do have to say, I feel like I have to say, I'm a Christian, but I have no problem with gay people, I have no problem with whatever. And actually, I mean, we've stayed involved with the Youth Assembly, feel that connection there, and it was that made me realise I'm a feminist. And this, I think, connects with a lot of what we've heard already. So my little group of girls that I was kind of leading had suggested, within a debate about something completely different, that we just change the language to something more inclusive, as Jane's been talking. And it was just that, for example, if there's a hymn in which it's talking about, God, you are wonderful, and as a son of God, I think this. And we just said, well, women can't sing that with any integrity, so just change it to child, or when it says he, say we. And this tiny little suggestion provoked outrage. And some very confident young men stood up and started yelling at us, saying we were throwing the whole Bible out the window, and how dare we. My feminist theologian pal stood up, and she's got 2 degrees in this, and was able to really gently refute their arguments from a biblical perspective, but she was completely ignored. And it was a really horrible experience, and it wasn't the fact that we disagreed. I mean, I disagreed with these boys on pretty much everything. It was this knee-jerk response of, how dare you, that was so totally disproportionate to what had been suggested. And as women, we had dared to challenge their secure patriarchal worldview. And so these ignorant 16-year-old boys shouted at me, and I was a leader within that community. It was a very safe space for me. And I was, 22 and very confident, but they shouted at me until I had to go outside and cry. So I will always be grateful to those boys for awakening me to the realization that I was always a feminist. But it's hard not to be bitter towards a church that enabled those unequal power dynamics to fester for so many generations that this is the learned behaviour for those boys, all of whom, by the way, are now training to be ministers. So now, we're not going to church. We have deep and lasting friendships from Youth Assembly, and I continue to have faith. My values are because of my faith. Values of radical hospitality, of choosing to see potential in people and walking alongside them for the long term, of working for justice, of siding with the marginalised. Feminism is about solidarity, and solidarity fits very well with the Christian idea that we're all one body and that all parts are valuable, and if one part of the body suffers, then we all hurt. So I have no problem with my identity as a Christian feminist, and it won't be a problem until, if and when I choose to dive back into Christian land. I'm not sure that the church deserves that commitment from me, though. The church, the whole church, not just the Church of Scotland, needs to recognise that it has caused and continues to cause a great deal of harm to people, and it needs to take responsibility for that harm. The church needs to have the humility to say sorry. It can offer to the world a vision of justice and grace and peace and forgiveness, and there's much that's important about that, much that's wonderful. But I wonder how long it will take the church to realise that it can only ever offer this vision. It cannot preach, and it cannot tell people how or what to think. And the thing is, this is me as a straight, cisgendered, young, married woman. If I walked in the door of a local church now with my lovely young husband who's a youth worker, it's like, come to us. We're like gold dust. We are acceptable. But we weren't acceptable before we were married. And we aren't because we're feminist, and we won't tolerate homophobia, and because we do critical thinking. And this is our experience as straight people. I cannot imagine the multiple oppressions and aggressions that LGBT people go through within the church, or the loneliness of unmarried people of whatever sexuality, because they are completely denied intimacy. So I'm too angry with the national institution at the moment to go to a local church and be able to worship with any kind of authenticity. I hope that in time we can find places where the teaching is good and nourishing and challenging, and where we can give and receive pastoral support. I hope that we can find a church that will become family. In the meantime, the questions that we're wrestling with are that challenge is an important part of our faith. How do you challenge yourself and be authentic and live with accountability while you're rejecting the aspects of the subculture that are harmful? How do you cling on to that kernel of faith and truth and grace? And how do you not throw the baby out with the bathwater? So I hope that I can help grow a feminism that understands and is welcoming to people of all faiths and none. And I hope that one day I can find and help grow a church that is feminist. Thank you.